The death of Baldur. Life at Asgard became ever busier as time went on. Neither gods nor goddesses now had time to sit on the greensward of Ida and play with golden chessmen. They had their hands full guiding the ever-increasing number of people on Earth. There were more and more battlefields for Odin and his Valkyries to watch over, and Thor was always away killing Jotuns and trolls. Loki was going from bad to worse, getting ever more malicious. And while he had always loved attention, now he flew into a frenzy of rage if he wasn't praised for his clever ideas. Only gentle Baldur did not change. But then Baldur began to be haunted by bad dreams. This worried the other Aesir greatly, for they feared that the dreams foreboded evil for him, and they could not take steps to protect him unless they knew what the dreams meant. So they met in council at Yggdrasil's foot, and there it was decided that Odin himself must go to the grave of Volva, a wise woman who had long been dead. He must bring her back by his magic and force her to reveal what Baldur's dreams meant. In the blackness of night, Odin rode to the burial mound of the Volva. He sang a magical chant, and her ghost rose, moaning and groaning from the hollow ground. Wearily she spoke, "Baldur's days are numbered. Hel has already prepared a seat for him in her dark world." And she sank back into her grave. With a sad heart, Odin rode home to Asgard and told the Aesir there was nothing they could do. Baldur would soon be leaving for Hel. But Frigg, Baldur's mother, refused to give up hope. She went out into the world and made all things, living and lifeless, promise not to harm her son. Water, fire, stones, and metals, diseases, plants, and trees, all of the animals gave her their pledges. Joyfully, Frigg returned to Asgard, and the Aesir were happy again. Now nothing evil could happen to their beloved Baldur. The Aesir were so sure of it that they playfully formed a ring around Baldur and pelted him with pebbles and rocks, spears and axes. They even shot arrows at him. All fell harmlessly at his feet, and Baldur stood smiling as if he had been showered with flowers. It was a marvelous game, and the Aesir laughed and enjoyed themselves. But not Loki. Jealousy gnawed at his evil heart. He sneaked away, disguised himself as an old crone, hobbled up to Frigg and said, "How wonderfully well you have protected your son. But are you sure that everything in the world has promised not to harm him?" "I am quite sure," Frigg replied. "Everything except the little mistletoe. It is so small and soft, I didn't bother to take it in oath." "Aha! This will be Baldur's undoing," Loki thought, as he hobbled away in a hurry. So he quickly found a mistletoe plant, made a sharp arrow from one of the twigs. Then he returned to the Aesir, who were still at play around Baldur. Hod, Baldur's blind brother, stood aside by himself. "Why don't you take part in the game?" Loki asked him. "How can I?" answered Hod. "I cannot see where Baldur stands. Besides, I have no weapons." "Here," said Loki, "take my bow and arrow, and I shall guide your aim." With Loki's help, Hod filled the bowstring and listened to the soft sound of the arrow falling to the ground. Instead, he heard a dull thud and a cry of anguish from all the Aesir. Never had an arrow found its mark so well. The little twig had pierced Baldur's heart. In horror, the Aesir turned and stared at Hod, who was again standing by himself, for Loki had hurried away. Their arms fell limply at their sides, and they all wept. How could their world survive without gentle Baldur? At last, the Aesir pulled themselves together and began to prepare a stately funeral for Baldur aboard his great ship. With their heads bowed low, they carried him down to shore where the ship lay beached. All the gods and goddesses, all the elves and dwarfs, even some trolls and Jotuns came to bid Baldur a last farewell. Only Loki was nowhere to be seen. They built a pyre under the mast and covered it with Baldur's treasures. But when they tried to launch the ship, it stood as if it were nailed to the ground. No one could budge it, not even Thor. They had to send to Jotunheim for the ogress Hyrrokin. She came at once, riding on a wild wolf with a serpent for a bridle. And she gave the ship such a hard shove, the sparks flew from the rollers, and the land trembled. Well, once the ship was afloat, Baldur's body was placed on the pier. When Nanna, his wife, saw this, her heart broke, and she died. She could not live without him. So the Aesir sadly laid her down at her husband's side. Then Odin took off his golden armlet, put it on Baldur's chest as a parting gift, and lit the pier. Thor swung his hammer 3 times over the fire and blessed it. The ropes were cut, and the flaming ship drifted out to sea, with Odin's black ravens fluttering about the mast. Aegir's daughters tossed high their white scarves of sea foam, and everyone wept for Baldur as the ship sank down to hell. Odin's sorrow was great, but Frigg's was greater still, for she blamed herself. Why had she neglected the little weak mistletoe? And was there no way to undo her carelessness? Who wants to win my everlasting love, she asked the sons of Odin. Who dares to travel to the dark world of hell and bring Baldur back? Odin's son Hermod, who had great courage, stepped forward and said he would travel the road to hell. So they saddled Odin's horse Sleipnir for him, and he galloped away. For 9 days and nights he rode across the dismal swamps and through haunted valleys. On the 9th night he came to a bridge paved with gold, which spanned the icy river from Niflheim. It was a bridge that only dead men on their way to hell must cross. Without fear, Hermod started across it, but its guardian, a giantess sitting at the other bank, challenged him. "Who makes my bridge ring so loud?" she cried. "100 dead horsemen make less din than your steed. You are not a dead man. The color in your cheeks gives you away." She rose to stop him. "I am Hermod, son of Odin. I am on my way to hell to seek my brother Baldur," he shouted back. "Pass then," said the giantess. "I saw your fair brother crossing the bridge. The way to hell is down and north," she added, pointing the way, for even she was grieving for Baldur. Hermod followed the road, which soon led him to the bank of Hell's realm. There, the fearful dog Garm stood snarling and straining at his leash, but Hermod spurred his horse and Sleipnir leapt high over the gate. At the doorstep, he dismounted and walked into the hall of Hell. Stony-faced and dreadful to behold, Hel sat on her throne. Across from her sat Baldur, with Nanna at his side. She had a wreath of wilted flowers on her head, and a horn of sweet mead stood before them untouched. They sat without stirring, as if in a dream. Hermod greeted Hel and began to speak. For a whole night he pleaded with her to let Baldur go. He told her how much the Aesir grieved over their loss and how all nature was weeping for him. At last she rose from her throne, and the gold that entwined her huge body flared like games as she spoke. "If it be true that Baldur is so beloved that all things, living and lifeless, weep for him, I will let him return to the living. But if there's one thing that will not weep, then he must remain with me," she said. Hermod prepared to leave, and Baldur rose and led him to the door. He thanked Hermod for coming such a long way. Then he gave him Draupnir the golden armlet and asked him to take it back to Odin, because only the living have need of gold. Well, Hermod rode back to Asgard so fast as Sleipnir could carry him, and Hel's words brought new hope to the Aesir. They had no doubt that all things in the world would join them in weeping for Baldur, and Frigg at once sent messengers to tell all things to weep Baldur out of Hell. Every creature and everything wept. Men and women, beasts, birds, trees, flowers, stones, metals, everything living and lifeless shed tears for Baldur. But as the messengers were returning to Asgard, they came across an old crone sitting all alone in a cave. When asked to weep, she refused to shed a single tear, but rasped, "Never has Baldur done anything for me. Let Hel keep what she has." She called herself Thok, but she was really Loki in disguise. And so Baldur had to remain in the dark realm of Hel. There he was soon joined by Hod, for, after the rules of the Aesir, he must be paid with a life. Vali, Odin's youngest son, avenged Baldur's death and sent Hod to Hel.